Human trafficking is a terrible reality, even here in the US, even here in the New York metro area and suburban Fairfield County. And we're blessed today to be joined by two women who are doing tremendous work to combat human trafficking. Nita Belles is the author of the book In Our Backyard, an important and heartbreaking book with stories about trafficking here in the States. And Jamie Manirakiza runs the Partnership to End Human Trafficking. They're doing life-saving work on the ground in Connecticut with a rescue home in Bridgeport. Stay tuned. This is important. We're on 1350 AM and 103.9 FM, or we're on the phone with the Veritas mobile app. Get the app at the Apple App Store, the Google Play Store, or veritascatholic.com. Let Me Be Frank is brought to you by a grant from Foundations in Faith. Foundations in Faith embraces innovative approaches to funding pastoral care programs in the Diocese of Bridgeport. Resources focus on energizing lifelong faith formation and discipleship and fostering commitment to justice and accompaniment with our most vulnerable. From seminarians to retired priests, from baptism to last rites, from suburbs to inner cities, the reach is broad and the impact is meaningful. For more information, visit them on the web at foundationsinfaith.org. Okay, here we go. This is Let Me Be Frank on the Veritas Catholic Network. I'm Steve Lee, and it is my great pleasure, as always, to introduce Bishop Frank Caggiano.
Well, my friend, thank you. It's good to be with you again. And we have an extraordinarily important topic to talk about, right?
Yes. Yeah, this is such an important and I think frightening issue that people probably don't even think enough about, and they don't realize that it's everywhere, even here in Fairfield County and the New York suburbs. So, so with that ominous introduction, let me get in and introduce our two guests today. We have two guests, and let me introduce first Nita Belles. Nita Belles is an author, speaker, and a leading national expert in the anti-human trafficking movement. Her work has been featured by CNN, Fox Files, BBC, NPR, Focus on the Family, and many others. And Nita is the founder and president of a nonprofit which shares the same name as her book, and it's In Our Backyard, which I've read, and the stories will break your heart and boil your blood. Second, I want to also introduce our other very special guest, Jamie Manirakiza. And Jamie is the executive director of the Partnership to End Human Trafficking, which these folks are on the ground here, raising awareness and rescuing people who have been trafficked and helping them get back on their feet. Jamie has over 10 years of experience in anti-human trafficking up and down the Northeast. In addition to her work, she is an adjunct professor for Vanguard University's Human Trafficking Certificate Program, and she's consulted on crime victim services for a number of national organizations on promising practices and trauma-informed care. Nita Belles and Jamie Manirakiza, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having us.
And thank you, my friends. Thank you for this. As I said at the beginning of our recording, it's an extraordinarily important topic, and one that I think is fair to say a lot of people don't understand very well, and the implications of it. So I was going to ask you, when we prepared beforehand, I had mentioned that I was going to ask you, how did you get involved in this topic in your own life? But before we do that, I'm going to start with you, Nita. Could you define for our listeners, when we say human trafficking and the problem that it creates, it's the evil that it is, how would you describe it for people, like a basic definition? What are we talking about?
So human trafficking is both sex trafficking and labor trafficking, and it manifests itself in many ways. But essentially, it's when force, fraud, or coercion makes a person do things against their will. It is a federal crime. Since 2002, every state has criminal statutes against it. It's a scourge that hits primarily anybody. It can happen to the rich, the poor, any gender, any race, it is a scourge that hits our country and the world.
Right. So it's a global problem as well as a national problem, as well as a local problem, right? Yeah.
Yes, yes, all of the above.
So, and Jamie, from your perspective, you're very active here in the state of Connecticut. Is that correct? In the partnership to end human trafficking. So, from your perspective, if I were to ask you, what would you say? How would you add to what Nita just said?
Yeah, I mean, human trafficking, I've only spent my career working domestically with individuals who have been sex or labor trafficked here in the United States, where their actual victimization has happened here. What I've often found is that individuals don't think that it's happening here. So that's our first barrier and myth is just we often characterize trafficking as a developing world problem or happening in sort of a red light district that's been characterized by film. But trafficking happens locally in our communities, and almost all of the individuals who have been victimized by this crime, and we refer to as survivors, are domestic. We do serve foreign-born victims in the U.S. as well, but the majority of cases that we are referred and that we identify are individuals who are U.S. citizens as well. And so it's just important to dispel that myth. And trafficking, I think, in terms of adding to what Nita shared about what the crime is often hard to identify because victims almost never self-identify as a victim of this crime. And so we can get more into that. But that is a challenge, both here locally in Fairfield County and in Connecticut and nationally.
Because I would presume many of them would fear for their safety or their life if they were to speak up, because there would be no one immediately to turn to if they are in the clutches of someone. So Nita, we use the word trafficking. It's very interesting. Why that word? It implies movement. It implies transport.
Right. So trafficking is a term that was given in 2000 when the Trafficking Victims Protection Act took place in the United States. And it implies movement, but a person can be born, raised, and trafficked in the same house without ever having left. What it is, it's a form of force, fraud, or coercion over another person. And so that act of trafficking is what is described.
Yeah, so it doesn't necessarily imply relocation in some sense. It can actually happen in your own home.
That's correct. That's correct.
Shocking.
Yeah.
That's shocking.
Yeah.
Right?
It is. And I loved what Jamie said about most victims don't realize they're victims. I know a lot of survivors that I've worked with, and they have said, I didn't know I was a victim of human trafficking. In fact, our new executive director at In Our Backyard was trafficked from the time she was 8 till she was about 11 by a neighbor while she was living in her home, and her parents didn't know. And she was in her 20s, in her late 20s, when she read In Our Backyard, and she said, I think that's what happened to me. And it began her journey. And, as Jamie said, most victims of trafficking don't know they're being trafficked. They think they may have a boyfriend that's not treating them right or something like that, but they don't realize. They think they're doing all of this on their own because that's what the trafficker's been telling them.
Right. So then, Jamie, would it be fair to say that human trafficking is a modern form of slavery?
So the term is often used, and in a global context, modern day slavery is used frequently. In the U.S. context, we've sort of moved away, at least at Partnership to End Human Trafficking, from using that term, particularly because of the connotations that are connected to the historical roots of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade in the U.S. And so, but for the purposes of understanding human trafficking as a crime against a person and against their livelihood, certainly individuals are being controlled in ways that are reflective of enslavement, of lack of choice,
Right.
lack of freedom. We've had traffickers brand victims through tattooing or other methods of burns. So, there's many examples that
Hmm.
we could give to that. But,
Hmm.
and just to echo what Nita just shared, we've worked, many of the individuals that I've worked with domestically, the first traffickers were often somebody known to them, may have been a family member, may have been an aunt, an uncle, a step parent, or somebody who posed as a boyfriend. And so that's sort of just when we think about myths versus facts, and dispelling those, we often think of traffickers as stranger danger and
Hmm.
unknown to
Hmm.
the victim, but oftentimes it is somebody who's relatively
Wow.
close.
In which case has trust that betrays the trust and begins the cycle. Right.
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 Absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So Nita, may I ask you this question then? You had mentioned that there's sex trafficking and labor trafficking. So let's talk about the labor first. What does that mean in the concrete?
Well, I think sometimes the best way to explain is to talk about an instance. The first victim of trafficking that I encountered was actually a victim of labor trafficking. She had been brought back and forth between Hong Kong and the United States for 12 years. They obtained her by just a little ad at a grocery store where they had the 8 by 10 piece of paper with the little uh, cut off things at the bottom, called her. She came. The family was nice for like 3 months. And then the abuse began. She was horrifically treated. She was beaten. She was raped. She was treated horrifically. In addition to that, she had to raise the 2 children. She had to do all of the cooking, all of the cleaning, all of the um, housework, everything. She was not allowed to leave the house. After several years, she finally was allowed to get on a bicycle and ride on a bicycle trail in their gated community, but she wasn't allowed to talk to anybody. She was paid a pittance, and then there was what we call debt bondage involved, where she was given a salary which was far beyond a living salary. It was far below minimum wage, even. And but in that, she was charged for the bed she slept in. She was charged for the food she ate. If she went to the store, she may have with the family always, but maybe she needed a hairbrush, and that hairbrush cost $4. She'd be charged 20 on her account. So always they keep the debt higher than she can pay back. So there was no way out for her.
I just, I mean, I read your book as well, and some of the stories, like Steve said, break your heart. It's unfathomable to me that people are capable of such cruelty and evil to another human being and could still sleep at night. I mean, it's just so shocking Jamie, you've had experience 10 years plus of, and the work of the coalition, the partnership, is to try to give rescue and recovery. And so, what are some of the stories? What are some of the? I'm sure there may be many that you've experienced with the people there. And I presume, are they mostly women? Are there also men involved? What is that? How does that work? What's your experience with that?
Yeah. So PET, I'll refer to us as PET too, because it's a long title, Partnership to End Human Trafficking. We have a 2-year transitional home here in
Mm-hmm.
Connecticut. We're the only statewide housing provider actually here. Prior to this, I worked in Philadelphia and in New York. So I've worked in a few different locations and done different programming. The majority of my experience has been with women or women and girls. I also used to work with juveniles who were part of a juvenile court program in Philadelphia who had experienced domestic minor sex trafficking. And as Nita shared, that there's lots of instances of the coercive control, the fraud. When we think about young people, I'll give an example from years back. I worked with a survivor. I'll pick a story from years back just to preserve as much anonymity of those that we currently serve. But unfortunately, many of the stories have a similar forms of coercive control and abuse. And this individual was recruited by a friend or a person that she thought was a friend who was already being trafficked herself and victimized actually as a minor. They were both 15 at the time. The friend actually was first sex trafficked, starting at 12. And it was familial trafficking. Father was incarcerated. And there was lots of forms of just poverty and high vulnerabilities that this individual experienced. And she was recruited by a trafficker, a male trafficker that was in his late 20s, that developed a ring, a stable of young girls that he recruited and then controlled. And through many elements, controlled their bank accounts, controlled their comings and goings. But it was through the fraudulent nature in the beginning as a boyfriend. And so it was under the guise of we're building a life together. Finding that vulnerability that young person identifies that he can see in them, such as missing safety, missing housing, witnessing abuse at home or experiencing abuse at home, and sort of exploiting that, and at first preying upon that and saying, I'm gonna save you. I'm gonna be loyal to you, and in return, you're gonna be loyal to me. And this is what we're gonna build. And so it's sort of building this dream and always dangling the carrot out front of what that dream will become. Unfortunately, it's often never fulfilled. I don't want to say never, but it is sort of dangling this carrot. And so this young victim got recruited by her friend into the life, and through elements of just subtle coercive control, not subtle, but not overt, putting a deadly weapon in front of her and saying, you're going to have to do this. You're going to have to be sexually exploited and turn over your money tonight. The first night that she showed up, she didn't feel like she had anyone to turn to and run to in that moment. Just as you said at the beginning, Bishop Frank, of like, where would these victims run to? She said, where would I go if I ran out of that hotel room? Who was going to believe me? Who was I going to go to?
Right, exactly. So then it would be fair to say that the majority of individuals who are trafficked start when they are young, when they are children or adolescents or teenagers, or is it also adults? Nita, what do you think?
I think that it can start at any age. I've seen it start as young as infancy, or it can start in somebody's 20s, 30s. Mm-hmm. It can even be, especially for labor trafficking, it can start in a person's 50s. It can hit any age, really. It just depends on the trafficker's motivation. The trafficker's motivation is greed, money, making money off of the victim. And so however that can be facilitated, mm-hmm. and like Jamie said, there's a vulnerability. So the trafficker mm-hmm. just looks for that vulnerability, capitalizes on it, earns the trust of the victim, and then the rest is kind of history, because they use that person until mm-hmm. there's some reason they absolutely mm-hmm. can't, where the person is removed or mm-hmm. whatever.
So may I ask you a follow-up question, just to clarify the issues as best as we can? For adults, particularly in labor trafficking, is it mm-hmm. an accurate statement or a statement that has to be either nuanced or corrected if I were to say that those who are immigrants or those who have come into the country in an undocumented state are going to be more likely victims of labor trafficking than adults who are, born and raised here and have a network of friends and other social support?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. As Jamie said, there's a myth that, when somebody says trafficking, automatically people look at sex trafficking and they automatically think it is foreign born here in the United States, which is where we focus our efforts in our backyard. But the myth is that it's all foreign-born nationals, but the truth is, with sex trafficking, the large majority is going to be American-born citizens.
Right.
In labor trafficking, it's the opposite.
Right.
They're often foreign-born.
They're foreign-born. So let's go to the other half of the equation then. You had just segued with the sex trafficking. Would it be fair then to say that the younger a person is, the more vulnerable they are to fall into this, particularly if they come from a situation where it's insecure or there is a lot of violence in a house or domestic turmoil? Jamie, is that a fair characterization, or is it more nuanced than that?
We always echo as well that, anybody can unfortunately fall prey to trafficking. We have seen all demographics, but there are higher vulnerabilities. System involved, young people in the foster care system, runaway and homeless youth, the vulnerabilities that you just expressed. Disproportionately, girls of color have been disproportionately impacted and misidentified, criminalized even, who have often been sex trafficked. And so there is a lot of nuanced and issues that we have to face to really identify victims as victims of a crime because of the co-occurring overlap with other crimes that victims are often forced to participate in. So there are some vulnerabilities.
That would be
there.
The actual ultimate travesty of justice, if a person who's a victim of trafficking themselves are criminalized for the behavior that they were actually forced to do, right? Please, Jamie.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that I actually would say it's gotten better since 2009 when I started in the field. It's become better, but victims are often criminalized for the acts that they were forced to do, and that's why awareness and education is so important. Because when you get in front of judges and you get in front of prosecutors and defense attorneys and we get in front of our state policy systems and we educate about mitigating for understanding the nuances of this crime, that then we can get in front of the criminal justice system that may not have, as your people are being pushed through, or they get picked up on the street for a misdemeanor or possibly even a felony, recognizing that actually there might be something deeper that we need to look for, that we need to account for in charging or sentencing that
Nina,
individual.
you're shaking your head. So what else did you want to add?
Yeah. This year we passed a law in Oregon mandating that there be training for all juvenile justice employees, so that if a child is picked up, let's say a 14-year-old is picked up for, and this term just grades my nerves, prostitution, which we know because there is no such thing as a child prostitute. Anybody under 18 participating in an act of commercial sex is a victim of human trafficking. She's not a prostitute. Anyway, but when a child gets picked up like that and put in a facility and criminalized, like what Jamie said, now we've got a hope of somebody recognizing this is not a criminal. This is a victim of human trafficking. And I would echo again what Jamie said, that I know a lot of survivors over the last 16 years that I've worked in this. And I would say I would be hard pressed to find a survivor who wasn't treated as a criminal a lot, or at least some.
Right. My goodness. Wow. I wondered to myself, when I was a seminarian, I did a bit of service at Covenant House in the city. And now that I look back and just listening to what you have just shared, what a different lens to have seen all of that which they were trying to address, which I had no idea. I had no concept of what you're talking about. And of course, that was many years ago. I mean, it would have been 40 years ago. But I had no concept that you're talking about a much larger reality. and how these young people, many of them were runaways, they came to the city, had nowhere to go, and then they would just disappear. And you say to yourself, well, where did they go? Well, now I wonder if many of them just fell into what we're talking about here, right?
Yeah.
And that speaks to training. Exactly what you're saying, Nita. It speaks to the training to be able to see the situation with an informed set of eyes rather than presumption or just, meeting immediate needs are crucially important. I mean, Jamie, you do that, right? In the partnership, but to teach society of the larger issues at hand, right? Right.
Yeah, I think for years in this movement, there was a kind of a judgment for people that were doing awareness training and saying, you're not boots on the ground, you're not running a facility or whatever. But without awareness, nothing happens. Awareness is key to this issue. And without awareness, law enforcement don't know to not treat these precious human beings like criminals. Without awareness, a victim doesn't know she's a victim. Without awareness, the family doesn't know that hasn't gone off the deep end, but instead she's being trafficked.
Right.
So yeah, awareness is key. And then what to do, how to get help.
For the person who's the victim, I guess one of the questions I have too then is the perpetrators of this, and it's an evil, the perpetrators of this, right? How often are they caught and accounted for? Or do they slip into the darkness? Do they, precisely because it's the victims who are up front, right? And I wonder, Jamie, do you have any idea from your experience? Do the masterminds of this ultimately get their just desserts, or?
So I think individuals who are perpetrating the crime are certainly under-identified in our country and around the world globally. And part of that is because of the nuances of the crime, the proactive long-term investigative work that it often takes from boots on the ground, local law enforcement and federal law enforcement. And there's only so much that we can prioritize within the realm of public safety. And so, and there's been a need for years to have a paradigm shift in law enforcement's eyes of understanding what prostitution is. We talk a lot about minors, but the reality is I've met girls on their 18th, a week after their 18th birthday, sitting in handcuffs for prostitution, and nothing magical happened from their trauma from 17 years old and 364 days to 18, right? So there's not a statement on the legalization of prostitution at all. It's just the reality that we have to look beneath the surface of crimes of prostitution. And there's been a huge need. So traffickers certainly have been prosecuted, and there are some really great successes. But we certainly have more to go to really get at the root of the crime.
I think we're due for a break. When we come back on the other side of the break, one of the things I'd like to ask your thoughts and input are the structural issues in our society that we need to look at, because perpetrators are taking advantage of, either presumptions in our society or structures in our society that make this so widespread, because we're talking hundreds of thousands of people that are in this. So that's one question. And then your personal journey to become such passionate individuals to want to address and end this. So a little preview to our listeners.
Okay, and so with that, we'll take a quick break. This is Let Me Be Frank on the Veritas Catholic Network. His Excellency is talking with Nita Belles and Jamie Manirakiza, two women who are leading the fight against human trafficking. We'll be right back.
If you're concerned about your end-of-life plans, searching for a Catholic cemetery, or have loved ones who are buried in one of the 14 Catholic cemeteries throughout Fairfield County, now might be a good time to begin planning for yourself or for other family members. Call one of our family advisors at 203-742-1450 and select option 5 to leave a message, or visit www.ctcemeteries.org. Many people don't realize that they can be buried with their deceased loved ones, even if all of the family's in-ground plots have been taken. The Diocese of Bridgeport Catholic Cemeteries provides in-ground burials, as well as columbarium and mausoleum options. This makes it possible to unite your family together in the same cemetery, and it's an opportunity to build a bridge for your family back to the church. Talking about this issue is not easy, but pre-need planning makes your wishes clear, reduces cost, and helps your family avoid difficult decisions at a time of grief and loss. You can start your planning now by contacting one of our family advisors at 203-742-1450 and select option 5, or visit www.ctcemeteries.org. We can guide you through the options, regulations, and considerations to help you make the best decisions for your family. The number is 203-742-1450 and select option 5, or visit www.ctcemeteries.org.
Welcome back to Let Me Be Frank on the Veritas Catholic Network. His Excellency is having a really important discussion about human trafficking with Nita Belles, the author of In Our Backyard, and Jamie Manirakiza, the executive director of the Partnership to End Human Trafficking.
So,
Excellency?
as I mentioned before we took the break, I'm curious because you're both expert in this and you're passionate and extraordinarily knowledgeable, obviously, and experienced. So, from a societal point of view, you can look at this question two ways. What are the structures of society that allow this to flourish? Or another way to answer the question is, what structures in society would have to be changed to mitigate this phenomenon in our midst? Because these individuals are exploiting issues, right? Nita, how would you answer that question?
You know, I have believed for years that if everyone treated everyone else with equality, that we would not have human trafficking. How could you possibly traffic somebody that you felt was just as important and just as valuable as you are? And so I think the main thing, I mean, if we're going to get right down to it, the greatest of these is love and loving your neighbor as yourself. And if we were to have a society that brought that about and looked out for each other, and that's part of the reason for awareness. It's like, look out for your fellow person. One of the things that In Our Backyard has done, I'm going to show you a sticker here. This is called a freedom sticker.
Oh, yeah.
These are in all 50 states, and these go inside the restroom stalls. We first put these out and made a law in Oregon, the Freedom Sticker Protection Act, and it was mandated that they go out with every renewal of a liquor license in the state of Oregon to be put inside the bathroom stalls. And so these freedom stickers are now in all 50 states. I think I do know how many states there are. They're in all 50 states. And what I was going to say is they're in about 30,000 convenience stores nationwide.
Wow.
With our partnership with Convenience Stores Against Trafficking and the training. And one of our larger chains has had recoveries as a result of awareness and understanding how to report. They've had about 10 recoveries over the last year.
Recoveries meaning
recoveries of victims of human trafficking.
Wow.
Into the convenience store. The clerk recognizes this isn't what it appears to be. And she or he knows how to report. We provide all of that information. We provide the training, and that person is recovered. And we work with the National Human Trafficking Hotline. They connect us with local agencies, law enforcement, and the hope is that they can stay out, but at least they are given an opportunity at that point to be free and safe.
Yeah, that's the reach in to the situation that has no exit. It gives them an opportunity, at least an opportunity. Is there a national hotline?
Yes.
What is the
national
number?
hotline, 888-3737-888. And I say it that way because it's just easier to remember. So there's the 888 and then the 3737-888
888.
on the end.
Well, thank you for
And I
sharing
recommend that everybody put that in their cell phone, because that is a way that anybody can help. And we need to empower people to be a part of this fight. We can't do it alone. Jamie's doing awesome work. In Our Backyard is doing good work, and a lot of other agencies, but we've got to link arms and really make a difference. And that is one way we can do it, is by everybody, one, recognizing that it happens, and two, what to do when they see that it's happening. And if I could hit another myth here, what to do when they see that is happening is not put on your Superman cape and go and try to rescue the victim. What we do is we report it, we stay safe, and there's a kind of a thing that's been happening, particularly over the last few years, where there are nonprofits that are out rescuing the victim, and they're going out on the streets. One of the things that In Our Backyard has done we're working on our 15th Super Bowl, is work with law enforcement surrounding Super Bowl and local nonprofits to help bring awareness, and then work together so that victims can be recovered, prosecutions can take place for the traffickers, and awareness is raised. And in doing that, we have worked with a lot of agencies, and some of them have been great and some of them haven't. But when the rescuers come in, and sometimes they're in the form of being, I'm ex CIA, ex whatever, law enforcement or whatever. And a lot of times that kind of action where they go out on the street and not understand that this victim doesn't want to be rescued because she thinks she's there on her own. And so they put her life in danger by going in and scooping her out. And what really needs to happen is that we need to have the right way to come alongside her and say, we're here for you and we can help you. And so the National Human Trafficking Hotline does have that understanding. Right. And it's just a great tool.
Wow, tremendous. Thank you for sharing that. Jamie, how would you respond to structures or perhaps things that would need to be changed or added or to try to mitigate this? Because my impression is it's growing. Is that correct as a phenomenon?
It's hard to speak to because I think trafficking has been, as an organized crime, is always, yes, the International Labor Organization has a much higher statistic than it did in 2016 now globally of those who are being trafficked. So certainly it's growing. I guess maybe I'll answer it too by saying the structural, I think there's sort of two things that come to mind when thinking about sex trafficking and labor trafficking, and they're connected and a little bit divergent. I think the overarching issue of trafficking in either form is the fact that people are dehumanized by other people, right? So we think of others as less than, and we get into lots of things around gender-based violence, racism, and all of the isms that are just, fear of migrants, all of the things that really make people far more vulnerable to being dehumanized by others and or systems. I think when it comes to sex trafficking, there's a historical gender-based violence that, of course, this crime affects boys and girls and LGBTQ. And so I think it's important to just recognize that anybody can be victimized, but disproportionately women and girls are. And then there's further subgroups of not subgroups. There's individuals that are more vulnerable within women and girls, and so I think structurally we have to address just the gender-based violence notions, right? If we think about what we said earlier in the conversation, that there's no such thing as a child prostitute, which is absolutely true. Just the fact that that term has existed for so long, in any other circumstance, if a 14-year-old was raped, which is essentially what that is, right, by maybe a 40-year-old man, it could be reported in most states as statutory rape. But because that person might put money on the table and then leave, it's prostitution. It's just if we just quickly sit with that concept and how that has even been allowed or accepted societally by law enforcement when they come into that room and walk away, or tap the buyer on the hand and lock up the female, is perpetuated by, I think, some of that structural notions of gender-based violence. And then on the labor side, I think a structural aspect is the demand for cheap goods and services, in which I think we have a lot of everyday people who don't want to participate in this. As soon as we become aware, can do our part with purchasing power and trying to be cognizant of those that we hire in the service industry, and trying to ask questions about those who are subcontracted. If we hire a whole team to come and landscape our home, talking to the general contractor or the manager and trying to get a sense of their business practices with their labor that they send to your property, are really basic ways that we can try to just be more empowered as consumers.
It's interesting. When I was pastor of St. Dominic's, and this may not be germane to our conversation, but it's a memory that, and therefore I'm curious to see how you would diagnose this. But when I was pastor of St. Dominic's in Brooklyn, this was many years ago, I had a gentleman come to me who is an immigrant and in an undocumented state, who did gardening for a family that was very prominent in the parish, and also very well off. And he was promised cash each day, and he was promised $100 a day. He worked 6 12-hour days, and he only got $300, and he had no recourse. And he came to me because the $300 was what he would have to pay for the apartment that he shared with other men. And at the time, he was deathly afraid if he had gone to the authorities, he himself would then be subject to penalty. And perhaps it's not what we're talking about, but it's another manifestation of people. And then he went back to work for the gentleman. My point is, he kept working for him. It's such a dynamic, right?
So I think a common myth in trafficking, sex or labor, is that people do not receive anything of value or any money, and they can, in fact, and still be trafficked. So, it might be at a minimum, it was certainly a case of wage exploitation. And even one of the things that I think folks, and we do this in Know Your Rights campaigns, even if you're undocumented, you are still entitled to Federal Labor Standards Act of minimum wage. And so it's important for even undocumented individuals to know that they are entitled to minimum wage standards, even if they are undocumented. Now, they probably would want to present their case with a legal services attorney, like the immigration folks at Catholic Charities often have, so that they can have an attorney who's representing them, so that they can have that safety. But
so now, Nita, you have traveled the whole country, right, with this message and through your writings and the rest. So state by state, are there states who are more progressive, if I could use that word, more in tune with this and trying to address it than others? Like, how will we do in our neck of the woods, New England, the Mid-Atlantic states? How are we doing addressing this?
I'm going to defer to Jamie on that, because she lives in your neck of the woods, and I think she's going to be more qualified to answer that.
Yeah, the reason I mentioned it is because you mentioned Oregon, and they were the first to pass this law that you had mentioned. So I guess, Jamie, I'm going to come back to you with this question, but from your experience, are there states that are doing modeling sort of legislation to address this besides Oregon?
From my experience, I have seen different states. It depends on really who is in power in the state and if they are supporting that. And but I think Oregon has done some good things. I think Florida has done some good things. One of the other things, and we just lost when we got to the House of Representatives in Oregon, but one of the things that we have been trying to do for 6 years is have mandatory K through 12 prevention education for children, so that when this scenario begins, they know it's not, somebody scooping up on the street and kidnapping, like, so much of the myth is, but that it's actual relationship that they already have, or somebody, let's say the runaways, Bishop, that you were talking about on the street, and how, they stand out.
Right.
And those kinds of things, that if they are taught in school that that's how it happens, then they are cautious and they are careful. We actually prevent. And I would, every day of every year, rather prevent somebody from being trafficked than have that happen. So prevention is so important. And every state, it just depends, like I said, who's in leadership. It really, over the years, I've seen it bounce around to where we've got, say, Kansas has a great law, and then we try to mimic it. When we did our law in 2011, that was the first law in the United States that mandated freedom stickers posted. We call them freedom stickers. They're called different things. There are different brands and people who have done that since, but that kind of thing. And rather than letting it, just be in one state, I think we piggyback off of each other and we learn from each other, and we communicate. We find out what works. Sometimes I've seen laws, I've been brought into situations where people are well-meaning and trying to put a law on the books that would really, they think, prevent, but what it really does is it empowers the traffickers and the buyers and takes all the power away from people that are being trafficked. So we're learning. I would say in 2006, when I started this, we didn't know much at all about human trafficking in the United States. We know a lot more now.
You know what's interesting, Nita, if I may, what you just said about education and training for children, it almost it's reminiscent to what happened after the evil of the abuse crisis, and how there is safe environment protocols, and how we do awareness and training of young people. Because in a sense, it almost sounds as if you're very young, there's a grooming that goes on. There's a way of getting into building that trust, which is what a predator also does in abuse, like individual abuse. And that would be sort of the structural change that we could look for, because then you empower young people to be, not to be as so naturally trusting. Well, not that I wouldn't want them to be untrusting, but I mean to be aware that something may be going on here, right? And someone taught me to watch for that. Jamie, you had mentioned in Connecticut there's a house so explain what that is.
Yes, so in Connecticut, we operate, and in the fall, we'll be operating a second home and expanding. But since 2020, we've opened up a residential program for survivors where we provide 2-year free trauma-focused survivor-centered housing, as well as all of the in-house trauma recovery groups and linkages to all and access to services that individuals need, as well as in-house employment. So Pet also launched our own in-house social enterprise business because we believe that a true path to long-term sustainability is giving individuals the opportunity to not only heal and provide housing, but if you don't have a place to earn money, to build your self-confidence, to build your resume, to express all of the talents that individuals have, we see a lot of recidivism. And so we developed a social enterprise business called the Pet Shop, Survivor Made. And about 3 to 6 months after living in residence, we offer individuals the opportunity to work, and they're fully paid. They're employees of the of PET. They are paid starting at minimum wage, but we have some lateral growth opportunities for promotions. And so individuals receive payment. They contribute they've been building through social entrepreneurship a business along with PET. They've built the business from the ground up. So it's survivor-led, it's women-led, and you can go online and buy products, and it's 100% under mission focus. So it's 100% under PET. And so all of the purchases go right back into giving more survivors opportunity to work and to be employed.
Well, I was wondering if there was a connection.
We did a play on our name, PET. So we make pet products, dog leashes. The women, yes. There is a play on our name. And so we have like dog and tick sprays, like doggy deodorant, doggy tick spray that we make. We make dog leashes. And then we also do home and life products. So the women make, and we do everything from start to finish, the R&D, the research and development, to the quality control standards, to the manufacturing, packaging, and shipping. So they learn all aspects of that business line and have developed it, of candles as well. And we have some other collateral products. They do a lot of artwork through our expressive art therapy program. And we moved that into the business as well. And so we sell artwork, and then we transfer that on to pieces like mugs and dog bowls. We're going to try to make a cat bowl soon. But really the essence and the mission behind it is providing employment opportunities so that folks can build a bank account, so they can buy a car. We've had women get their license, buy a car. We have women who have graduated out of our home who are living in their own apartments in the community now. And so it's meant to be that long-term from like beginning to end.
Right.
And so
did you say doggy deodorant?
Yes.
There was such a thing?
Yes. It is essential oil based. It's all natural. And
the things you learn each day. Yes. It's amazing. It's amazing. Okay. We only have 2 minutes left. So I left the best question to last, and you could pass if you wish. But to the extent that you're comfortable, within 60 seconds, you are passionate about this. You've devoted your professional life, perhaps a lot of your life, to this. And how did it start? Like, was there a moment where you said, "This is something I want to, I need to address in my life"? Was there a moment in your life, Nita, that said, "This is it for me. This is what I want to do"?
Yeah. I was working on my master's degree in theology with concentration in women's concerns. I had no idea I was going to get involved with this, but my professor showed it to me by having me read some books and learn about it. And when I saw it and I realized what it was, I said to God, this is the worst thing I've ever seen on planet Earth. I have to do something. Lord, what would you have me to do? And that began my journey.
Wow. That's tremendous. Yeah. Jamie, did you have a moment where you said, "This is what I want to dedicate my life, my ministry, my work to"?
Yeah, I think it. I don't know that I have an exact epiphany moment. I sort of, since a young child, always wanted to work on child abuse and neglect, and always knew that I wanted to be in social work. And so, and knew about trafficking from a young age, from reading, from different life experiences, and just decided that really couldn't look away once I knew about this crime, just couldn't look away from doing something about it. Right. And so was fortunate enough to find career paths where I could make, a small impact. But as Nita said, it takes partnership and collaboration on so many levels to just keep up the fight.
Right. Well, I will tell you this. I think for both of you, first, I'm extraordinarily grateful that you've spent this time discussing this issue, because I have learned a lot. I think a lot of our listeners have learned a lot about an issue that should be at the forefront of much of what we're doing, both as a nation and as people of faith, regardless of the religion one believes in. I mean, this should bind all of us together to work on this. And I would say this, Jamie, if it's the impact, or you're talking a global problem, the impact of any of us individually may seem small in the big picture, but it's enormous in the individual lives that are touched, right? So if more and more people get involved with this, the impact is going to be enormous, right? So I'm grateful for that to both of you, very much so.
Thank you. Absolutely.
We'll take one more quick break. This is Let Me Be Frank on the Veritas Catholic Network. His Excellency has been talking with Nita Belles and Jamie Manirakiza about human trafficking. And we'll be right back.
Hey, it's Matt from Restless on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network. Each week on Restless, we young adults restlessly seek the face of Christ in today's crazy and mixed up world. Join us each Friday at noon on 1350 AM, 103.9 FM, the Veritas app, or wherever you get your shows. Hope to see you there.
Okay, welcome back to Let Me Be Frank on the Veritas Catholic Network. Excellency, if it's okay with you, I would like to take host privilege and skip the listener question this week because I have burning questions for Nita and Jamie.
You, brother, do what you must do.
Thank you. So I guess I have two questions, and I'll present them both, and then Jamie and Nita, you can answer them as you see fit. My questions are, for labor trafficking, what are signs that we should look for? And are there questions that we can ask people to see if they are being trafficked? And then my second question is for parents. This is frightening. So is there a place where we can go, parents can go to learn about how to take preventative steps so that your kids don't get caught up in this?
So sure, thank you. I think I'm happy to take this first question on the labor trafficking signs and turn it over to Nita on the child and parent signs. I think signs to look for are recognizing that whether somebody's documented or undocumented, on the labor end, knowing the industries to look for and recognizing that there are different ways that people can be exploited. So just having your eyes open to particular industries that are higher prevalence. So agriculture industry, snow removal, landscaping, tree cutting, construction, a lot of the skilled labor segments of our society that are often filled by immigrants. And those immigrants might be on a guest worker visa, but that program, I've served a lot of individuals who have been labor trafficked, actually, who have been on a employer-based visa. And we don't have time to get into that, but just recognizing both that folks have that vulnerability and getting to know them, talking to them, seeing if they appear frightened when they're at your work site or at your home, if they're no eye contact, if they seem to have unresolved injuries where they haven't been able to attend any sort of medical treatment. And the basic things that I think we can all do to dispel sort of the fear of how do I approach this is recognizing that you're probably not going to quote unquote rescue anybody right in that moment, but it's equipping somebody to know that they have rights and that there are places to go. So equipping yourself with the hotline number, passing that on to somebody, equipping yourself with some know your rights information, that people have the right to be paid, that people have the right to safe work environments, right, they should have access to use the restroom when they're at a work site for a 10-hour shift if they're working on a construction site. So really basic human things, and just looking out for those if you have access, whether it's in your workplace or your home, and asking some questions of whoever, if you're doing the hiring, asking more questions about the work environments and the pay rates that the people are getting done. And then if you see anything suspicious, passing along some information of legal services for people and the National Human Trafficking Hotline.
Nita, how about the parenting?
So I think as parents, we need tools. And I'm going to suggest that we talk to our children about trafficking. And that's a hard thing to do. And people don't know how to talk to their children about trafficking. If you go to inourbackyard.org, there is a whole list of ways that parents can do that. Additionally, we have a couple of tools. We have a small booklet there that you can get for about $6 and go through that with your children. They use it in schools, in several schools in the United States. It is informative and yet age appropriate. Additionally, I'm going to recommend my book for children that are a little older. Teens, we've written it some from 14 up. They should be able to read the book and be okay. I suggest the parents read the book first, and that's probably the best thing a parent can do, is read In Our Backyard and see what it really is like and begin to talk to their children about it, begin to see what they can do to understand it so they can watch for their children, they could prevent. But having an open dialogue with your children makes a huge difference, and letting them know that it's there. I've spoken to high school groups, and the parents are like, oh, don't say sex trafficking, don't say pimp, don't say, whatever. But the kids already know those terms. So get with your kids, talk to them, let them know you are there for them to talk about. If there's a problem with one of their friends, they can come to you. You will not implement them in the solution in ways that are unsafe. You will protect them, but open that dialogue and get more and more awareness for children. Get behind talks, go to, if there is a presentation on human trafficking, take your child, help them to see what it really is and have that dialogue with them. If you've got a group of kids sitting around your house, then talk to the kids, bring up the topic. Great. Talk about it.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll get back to listener questions again starting next week. In the meantime, I want to thank our sponsor, Foundations in Faith. It's a grant from the St. Therese Fund for Evangelization that makes it possible for us to bring Let Me Be Frank to you. Foundations in Faith is committed to supporting and transforming pastoral ministries in the Diocese of Bridgeport, and you can learn more about their outstanding work at foundationsinfaith.org. Nita Belles and Jamie Manirakiza, thank you again so much for the life-saving work that you're both doing to rescue people who are being trafficked.
And I echo that sentiment. Thank you both.
And one more time, please give us each of your websites or where you'd like to send people for more information. We'll include them in the show notes.
inourbackyard.org
and peht.org.
Good. Easy to remember.
Great.
Good.
And the hotline is 888-3737-888. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
You were both terrific. Thank you. Thank you. You have done a tremendous service. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
I appreciate your heart and your commitment to getting the word out.
Mm-hmm. We have more to do. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Excellency, before we go, will you please give us your blessing?
Sure, of course. In the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time together. And we ask that your Holy Spirit continue to bless Nita and Jamie and all those with whom they work as they serve to eradicate this evil in our midst. But we ask that your Holy Spirit continue to encourage us, enlighten us, and make us courageous witnesses of freedom, the freedom that is the right and destiny of all your children. So bless them in their work, and bless all those whom we love and serve. For we ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Thank you both. And Steve, thank you. I will see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.